Hi gang, welcome to Module 5. In Module 5 we're going to talk about the data type known as a string. Now I want to start this off by saying a string is much like a railroad train. All right. So if we have a train relative to the railroad, it's got an engine, and it can have cars attached to it. It doesn't necessarily have to have cars attached to it, but we've got the ability to attach not an infinite number of cars to it, but up to a certain number of cars. So there's rules to that. And if we look at strings that way, strings, much like the numbers we dealt with in a previous module, depending on if we're dealing with 32-bit or 64-bit, how long that string can be is a finite length. So with that being said, a train with no cars is a string that's been declared but not initialized. There are no characters in that string. A string with one car behind it, or a train with one car behind it, is a string of one character. One character is, in other data types, called a char, C-H-A-R, or a character. Now Python is very downsized, and we don't have the char like you would have in other programming languages. So there's some things about how this chapter is presented in the book that I'm going to deviate from how he words it, because I want you to understand a concept in a way that can be applied to other languages. Java, C, C++, C Sharp, whatever it may be. I want the concept and not just the Python way. So Python is a very simple language in comparison to other languages, but I don't want you to leave this one and then get to another language. I don't understand. What is this? It's not the way we did it in Python. So conceptually, a train with one car, that's a good comparison to a string with a single character. If I have a string of more than one character, that's like what I would call a traditional string of characters, plural, meaning more than one. And we'll talk later about what indexing is, but let me preface this, and I think I might have mentioned it in a previous video, but in programming we start counting at 0. We don't start counting at 1. So if somebody said, how many, in programming say, how many do you have? I have 0. And then after 0 is I have 1. And after 1 is I have 2. Well, we don't look at it in normal day-to-day life, say, how many do you have? We don't say I have zeros. I don't have any. We don't look at that 0. We don't start until 1 in normal day-to-day life. And the math that you were taught, well, this isn't necessarily math and how we're going to deal with things in, I think it's probably going to be the third video in this module. We'll talk about indexing of these strings. So we've got our train car, and we've got the train itself, and they're connected. And if we talk about the data type, which is a character, or it's often referred to as CHAR as an abbreviation in other languages, that doesn't exist in Python. So Python, a character is a string of one character. Now in other languages, a character is identified by single quotes. And I want to follow that lead in this lecture. Now this chapter, how it's written, it doesn't align with that logic, but I want you to go along with it my way, which is a way that applies to other languages, so that when you get to the other languages, you're not having to relearn something. So a character, single quotes. String, double quotes. Character is just that, one character. So it's one, so just think single. A string, more than one. Double quotes is more than one. It's a great way to remember it. Okay. Now, with that said, we've got right here, this is not a variable, this is not a constant. What we see here is what we call a string literal, or a string literal constant. It's immutable, you can't change it, you can't go in and modify it. And we'll talk about other aspects of strings as we move forward in the upcoming videos. Now there's some things that they talk about in this section that I'm going to skim over, like this escape sequence, which is this backslash. We'll talk about that in the next video. That's in 5-2. And they're already showing it to us, but we're not going to deal with it yet. Okay. So with that said, let's scroll on down. And what we see here is a string literal constant. Every time the code runs, it sees this. Can't do anything other than display it. That's it. We can't reuse it elsewhere in the code. It's only good in that statement. So there's different versions of them. It comes out literally as you see it written. This, on the other hand, is a variable. Lowercase. Lets me know it's a variable. If it's uppercase, constant. Now this is a data type string variable with the name poem. It's followed by a string, but this isn't just a normal string how it's written, it's multi-line. Triple quotes for multi-line. It'll be displayed exactly as you see it. So if you save it as multi-line, it will be displayed multi-line. So here's an example. Variable, stored, multi-line. Pass that variable to the print method. It's displayed exactly as it was stored. So it's as if there's a new line sequence that was put in how it was saved. That's something I'll talk about in a little bit when I talk about it, that escape sequence. Okay, so here it is, and here we see that backslash n, that escape sequence. It's not something I'm really wanting to talk about at this point. We'll talk about it next video. In this one, we're passing the print method multiple values, just separate them by a comma. Now, how many values can we pass to a print method? About as many as we want. I don't think we're going to get to the point within our code, anything that we're going to write in this class, that it's going to say, wait a minute, you just passed me too many arguments for print. So they're each separated by the comma. That print method has functionality built into it to where it receives them, and it concatenates them together and displays them as a single string of characters. It puts a space in between the arguments that were passed to it. All right. So there's one way, actually there's two ways that we've dealt with a string. One is it's a variable or a constant. The other is it's a string literal. Boom, there we see it. It's literally how you see it. Difference between the literal and the constant or literal of variable? Well, the string literal constant only exists in that place within the code. I can't refer to it multiple times. A constant or a variable can be used as many times as we want within our code. Can we change a constant? Well, a constant can be changed, but we don't change it after the code has executed. A variable can be changed after the code has been executed. So that's some rules that we got to keep in mind. Now the next thing I want to talk about is a method that will change a data type. Now, in the numeric module, we deal with numbers. We had to think about whether it was an integer or a float. And there's mathematical rules when it comes to how things are going to be displayed or what you can do with an integer and what you can do with a float. And data type matters when we're talking about math. I can't multiply the word give times 2. I'll show you an example of if you tried a little bit later, what would happen. But what I can do is I've got functionality here, much like the float function or much like the int function. And this function, when I put something in the parentheses, it does what we call typecasting. It will change whatever you've passed it to that new data type, as long as the rules for that data type can be applied without throwing an error. So, can I put a number 4 in there? An integer called age. Can I put those things in there and convert them to a string? Absolutely. Can I convert a string that we saw up here above, poem 2, can we convert poem 2 to be a float? It's not going to be pretty. So things that we've dealt with as numbers, I can typecast them to be a string and treat them as a string of characters. And this first one, there's 4 characters there. The 9, the 8, the decimal point, and the 6. Each one's a character. Here's 5 characters. But this interprets these 5 characters as base 10. So that's 10 times 10 times 10 times 10. 10 to the 4th power. Or 1 to the 4th. No, it's 10 to the 4th power. Alright, so with that said, true, convert it to a string. True, what data type is true? With a big T. That's a Boolean. So now, this is of the data type true. Or of the string, excuse me. So that's the string function. It's a way to typecast or convert things to the data type of string. We'll use that quite a bit in, well, I'm going to say the last, or I should say the fourth or fifth videos in this module. I'll see you in Module 2.